Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Burkholder. I am, many of you may have encountered me before in the ISV space. I am an architect and strategist in CXE, and up until recently have been part of the Sentinel product team since before GA in September of 2019. I've largely been responsible for the technology integration program, which results in published solutions and integrations that are commercially available to mutual customers, which is the topic of today's presentation. This is the part one of a multi-part series. This will largely be about strategies and how to figure out what to build and what integrations might be resonant for SecOps teams that are using Sentinel. And then we will do follow-on sessions, which are technical deep dives about how you actually implement the various building blocks that might be comprised of a solution. There we go. So today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about SecOps and the role of SIEM plus XDR. For many companies who are already in the security space, you're producing alerts and detections or other insights and conclusions. Others are companies that are coming to the security space with raw data in which we'd like to tease out signal. So we'll talk a little bit about sort of the differences between security sort of insights and conclusions and operational insights and conclusions. Then we'll spend some time talking about scenarios. And this is really the meat of today's presentation, which is how to figure out what I can contribute as a partner and what personas and activities I can facilitate in a SOC that's running Sentinel. And then we'll talk a little bit about scenario details, specifically events and alerts, hunting, investigation, and threat intelligence scenarios. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to engage with Microsoft. For many of you, it may be the first time you ever build an integration with us. Others, you're building with Sentinel perhaps for the first time. And so there's some guidance we can give you about optimizing that experience. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about how to publish your solution. So Sentinel solutions are actually commercially available. They are deployable, but not transactable. They will appear in the marketplace, and we'll see that in a demo here in a second. So with that, let's step back and sort of set the stage for the conversation that Sentinel is heavily involved in. And this is really about security operations. So the customers of Sentinel are SecOps teams. And these are teams that are operating on the virtuous cycle of detection, investigation, and response. And detection is really what folks want to get to. How do I know what's going on that requires attention? Once I know those things, how do I figure out and determine we use the term blast radius a lot, but the scope of impact of a particular activity? And then lastly, what do I do about it? And so SecOps teams will frequently talk about mitigation, which is really as if I were to come upon an injured person on the sidewalk and they're bleeding, stopping the bleeding, getting the patient stabilized. Remediation is getting them back to health, and prevention is taking what we've learned from this experience and turning it back into operational posture or other activities that will prevent us from having this negative activity happen again. So detection comes from a lot of things. It comes from logs and raw event information, the sort of traditional who did what, when, with what, and from where. You as a company may be producing some component or all of those sort of questions in a log stream, and we want to tease out the nuance of malice contained therein. You may also be producing your own insights and conclusions. It's very easy to have some expertise in your own data and be able to say, this is something I know is not normal. And so when we see this, we want to let the SecOps teams know this is an indication that you might need to go further. We might also get data from devices and applications and all kinds of infrastructure components. All of that and more comes together to produce a detection. And this is ultimately the unit of work that's going to be placed in front of an analyst in a security operations team. Their job now is to begin to figure out what's the scope of impact, and begin to triage and prioritize it. And they may need a ton of additional information. They may get additional threat intelligence. They may get information from assets or identity databases. They may look for virtual IP logs to figure out who had what address when. They may look at other investigation environments and other SIMs and other tools. But at the end of the day, this is going to produce a list of to-do items that will be part of the response, and we will continue this cycle. Now, SecOps itself is ideally a collaboration between what has traditionally grown out of two different teams. One is the security operations team, which is really about protection, and the other is about the IT operations team, which is about availability and performance and reliability. Now, these two teams have to work together, but it can often be challenging. As we've matured our world, these teams, having grown from separate places, are growing closer and closer together. But they typically have grown from a place of reporting to different leaders, having different budgets, and having different responsibilities. One team is responsible or needs to affect infrastructure, apps, and identities to change policies and affect the way that systems operate in order to respond to security components. But an IT operations team is actually the team that owns those. And so they may be very, very opposite in operational posture. SOCs tend to be a little more shoot first, ask questions later, and operations teams tend to be very intentional. They tend to be very much driven by change management because they have learned through the school of hard knocks that we need to evaluate all of our impacts, we need to get approval from stakeholders, and do things in a very cohesive way. The amusing thing about this is that both of these teams are often operating over very similar, if not the same data, but they will draw different conclusions from it. And this is where Sentinel and activities that happen within the SIM provide a means for us to work together across these teams. So let me pause there for a second. We're going to jump into a series of strategies and guidance on what kinds of things you can build. But I thought what I would do first is a little bit of a demo. And take a look at Sentinel and take a look at the components that you might see and how we can contribute them. And then we'll talk about individual scenarios associated with these. So right now, I'm showing you a Sentinel portal. Sentinel is accessible as a UI now from two different places. The original portal.azure.com UI, which is what I'm looking at right now, but you will also find Sentinel now integrated into the Defender portal, so on security.microsoft.com, and you will see Sentinel experiences there as well. So if we have customers who are using both the Defender XDR, we have a unified set of experiences for the SIM and the hunting and custom detection analysis and custom third-party alert integration that happens in the SIM is now completely unified with the Defender portal as well. But we're going to start by taking a look in the original portal, because there are a couple of things that aren't quite all the way across to the experience that you will find in Defender. So we'll start here. So the place that produces the unit of work where analysts are going to start their day is the same in the Defender portal, is with incidents. And here you'll see that I have a variety of incidents, including some fairly sophisticated incidents and some fairly silly incidents. The reason I produce the silly incidents is it's a very good way to kind of highlight what actually happens to produce incidents. So frequently, we are going to bring log data or raw information and use the big data capabilities that are available in Sentinel to turn those into detections. And so I'm actually posting information from my weather station into a Sentinel workspace, and I can run queries against it, and I can hunt in it. I can begin to figure out things that might be interesting. In this case, I've actually used Copilot to generate a query that will graph solar radiation over time. And so I don't have a particularly large amount of data in this workspace, and it's a little bit fragmented, meaning I have some stuff from back in the end of May and a few things from now the 4th. I can change the interval for summarization and see a little bit more fidelity in the data, and I can see changes over time. This is an example of the type of thing that you might do when you're hunting to try and figure out, is there anything that I can tease out or observe in this data that might be meaningful? I can also do this with other information that's available in here. And one of the things that I can look at is the amount of rain that has fallen. And so I might graph this, and I might decide that it's interesting to create an alert that might give me a clue about whether or not I need an umbrella. So in this case, I've gone in to take a query that I've generated and tested by researching things in logs, and I've created an analytic rule for it, which is a way of taking that and producing something that will automatically run. And so I have this alert rule that has a query where I look at last hourly rain in. It's got a basic description. Some moisture's been detected. I'm saying it's not particularly important. I've mapped it to a few MITRE attack techniques just for fun. I have some very basic rule logic for it, which is basically saying if it's 0 to less than 1/10 of an inch per hour, it's damp. I can go ahead and map things that happen in that row of data to entities that Sentinel will use. I will run this rule automatically. I will run it every 5 minutes, and I will look back in time every 5 minutes. We will create an incident if we get any results back. If there are any related alerts that use similar entities over similar time, we will group those into a single incident. But we only look at for other alerts that are time coincident with when this incident fired. And we can also attach automation rules to this. So the nice thing about analytics rules is I'm encoding something I might have discovered in data in a custom query that will actually fire triggers. And I can attach automations to these. And so I can have one or more playbooks that actually run and do additional information. For example, I might enrich this incident by going out to a high value asset database and finding out whether or not this particular device that's reporting this information happens to be my CEO's laptop. Or I might want to go out to a virtual IP database and find out, well, who had this address at the time that this event happened? Or I might want to go out to vulnerability or other state or reference databases to figure out additional things that might impact it. For example, if it's a server, what application components are running on that server? So I can encode this learning into something that can be deployed as a template. And when that template fires, it shows up as an incident, and I have an incident that has occurred. That has fired of this "it's damp right now" incident. There are activities that I can run on this. I can run playbooks and create automation rules or create a team. It may be necessary for me to reach out to other people about this particular instance. I can create a Teams channel directly for that. One of the things I can't do with the alert that I created here is investigate it because there aren't any entities in it. So let's go take a look at one of the ones that does have some incidents with it. And so I can view the full details of this particular alert. Oops, I grabbed the wrong one. Apologies. That's the one I want. Come on, open up. So we'll investigate the SolariGate instance. In this case, we've opened up the graph. I can look at this a variety of different ways. I can look at a timeline. I can look at entities, insights. Everything that we see in this investigative environment was contributed from an alert or entities. And in this case, all of this information was presented by a third-party solution. And so all of the information we're looking at is non-Microsoft data, and we will map this to other things that exist in the workspace. So what we've talked about, to summarize up to this point in the demo, is that it's very easy to bring information in. You can bring information in a very custom way. You can also bring it in a very standardized way, a normalized way. We can use tools in the Sentinel platform to turn raw information into detections, and then we can use the rest of the environments, both the Microsoft Sentinel environment and the Defender environments, to investigate those in a much richer set of contexts. So there's one more thing that I want to show about here, and that is we've got a whole bunch of information that you'll see here from this these alerts. And in fact, the reason that this happened was because I deployed a new workspace and deployed a lab solution. So within Sentinel, there is this area called Content Hub, which is an ecosystem of commercially deployable solutions. And they can contain a wide variety of things. And we're going to talk about how to figure out what kind of a solution you might publish and what kinds of things should go into a solution in order to help someone who's a SOC user that's operating on Sentinel. So in this case, there are, right now, there are 356 public solutions. There's a whole bunch of community contributed standalone solutions, and then thousands and thousands and thousands of individual queries and reports and analytics rules that were created by practitioners for practitioners that are available. In this case, in this brand new workspace, I have one installed. And so if I look at, only the installed solutions, we'll see that what I've installed is the Sentinel Training Lab. So when you install a Sentinel workspace, you can deploy a workspace in your tenant in a matter of 3 to 4 minutes. It doesn't have any data in it. If you want to begin learning how the components of it work and move around, you can install the Sentinel Training Lab, which actually imports custom data and also some analytics rules and other activities that allow you to see all of the pieces. But the point here is that what we can do as partners is to contribute to Content Hub with deployable solutions. And there are solutions for every manner of host and component that you can come up with. And many of these involve very rich, very sophisticated componentry. So for example, the AWS solution actually has 57 analytics rules. So those are 57 detection automations that can create detections out of the raw stream of CloudWatch data. It has 2 data connectors, so 2 different places that you can plug digital pipes into Sentinel from different sources. It has support for hunters. It also has some workbooks, and we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these components and strategies for that. So with that, let me jump back to the deck and let's talk about some of the things that we've seen in the demo. So we've seen that solutions are sort of, well, not sort of, they are flat out installable, deployable packages of content that can include raw data, parsers, which are things that allow us to transform raw data into normalized data or do other schema-related things. Analytics rules, which are automatic queries that create detections, so things that help us get from raw data into things that I should really focus on and work on as an analyst. Workbooks, which are visualizations, graphs, and dashboards. We saw in the AWS solution, there are a lot of hunting queries. There's another thing for hunters called notebooks. We'll talk about hunting a little bit. And then lastly, you can also build playbooks. These are automations and workflows, so sort of SOAR connectivity. So the thing to think about when you're considering building integrations from Sentinel is Sentinel is an end-to-end platform. You may have seen in some of the other products that predate Sentinel or were in the industry for a while, there was a separate SIEM and a separate SOAR, and they might end up being a separate set of integrations and publications. And for Sentinel, you can consider end-to-end. So, real question is, given that I can build all of these things and then I can talk to SecOps teams, what should I do? So there's two key strategies that we can recommend that you start with. First is contribute to activities. The activities that SOC analysts do are operating on detections. So creating detections means you're helping them. The second thing that you can do is inform investigations. You may not have data in which malicious signal may be relative, but you may have data that's really important to someone who is evaluating an incident or investigating an alert. You may have information about how applications connect to each other. You may have information about vulnerabilities and whether or not certain vulnerabilities have been patched. And I might want to know, for this particular incident, is it a result or likely tied to a vulnerability that wasn't patched when it could have been? So all of this sort of state information falls into the category of informing investigations. And then lastly, you may be able to assist in mitigation or mediation. For example, one of our partners, Checkpoint, is a company that has firewalls and cloud access security brokers and the ability to block access to IP addresses or to domain names. So one of the things that might happen as a result of investigating things is I might say, look, this IP address is now clearly identified as a known C2 for a malicious threat actor. And I have evidence that there are devices in my environment talking to it. So maybe I would like to ask Checkpoint to block it. So there are lots of scenarios where you might be able to take your ability to enforce policy or create boundaries to assist in mitigation or remediation. And these would be sort of workflow activities. So contribute to activities. And then the second thing is start with what you produce. If you produce unprocessed events, probably the most important thing that we can do is figure out, are there nuances of malice that you could tease out from that pile of bits? So this is where we would use the SIM and big data technology to produce detections out of raw events. However, many of you are security companies and you draw your own insights and conclusions already. Those alerts and insights and conclusions are absolutely critical to investigation. And this is one of the areas where I absolutely love the phrase security is a team sport. Sentinel is a place where lots of signal and lots of insights and conclusions come together in context to help people, help an analyst make a timely and accurate determination of an event and what they should do about it. You may have reference data. Reference data is maybe historical data or asset inventory data or information policy databases, information label databases and things like that. That's useful and valuable. And lastly, you may have threat intelligence. And there are companies that produce threat intelligence as a primary business. And then those of us who produce insights and conclusions and detections are inadvertently, well, not inadvertently, but adjacently producing very high quality threat intelligence, because an observation of an incident, it includes a variety of entities, and it may include host names and usernames and IP addresses and domain names. Well, that's very high quality threat intelligence because we have a detection associated with it. And so we might want to use that threat intelligence to produce other detections within the environment that I'm working in. So contribute to activities and start with where you are. So let's talk a little bit about contributing to activities and what that implies in terms of the things that we might want. You can help people produce detections. Producing detections is either helping someone with threat intelligence or producing analytics rules that know how to observe certain conditions within your data. You may also enable hunting. And hunting is a special case of producing detections. It's something that more mature SOC teams may have a capability to do. Hunters are the truly creative types in the security world. And They operate on postulates. And I like to joke about hunting this way a little bit. It's like opening the refrigerator door and giving a big sniff and getting a bad smell. A successful hunt might result in the conclusion that it was the yogurt, and it might also produce the rules that we can implement in automation to detect the yogurt going bad so that we don't get the bad smell. So at the end of the day, producing detections and hunting are very closely aligned, which means that they need the same things. They need raw events, logs, reference data. They may use additional alerts or other detection rules and hunting queries. So these are things that can be contributed into a solution as building blocks to help someone who's trying to produce detections or hunting. You can do the same thing with investigation and enrichment. This is really about combining things like data and raw events and reference data with incidents and detections. But we may also use playbooks and process automation to go out and grab information from other databases, pull it into my incident so that my analysts don't spend time chasing data, which is something most analysts will tell you they spend way too much time doing. So it's a very high value thing to support enrichment. And then lastly, we obviously want to correct these errors. We want to produce a mitigation which stops the bleeding, and then we want to build automations and to-do lists of things that will help us get back to health. The highest value solutions contribute to all three of these sets of activities. So let's start with raw data, if that's where you live today and what your products can produce. So first off, unprocessed events are streams of information in which the nuance of malice may be contained. So the job is to create detections from raw information. So that can be packaged up. So you can encode your insights into this in a variety of ways. One of which is you can create analytics rules so that if you are able to identify this unusual behavior in the raw events that you produce, that's an indication that a security team might need to get involved, and code that as an analytic rule. So this is detection automation that can be deployed via a Sentinel solution so that a user can say, I want to connect up this information flow and start producing detections out of that so I can start pulling that signal into my overall stack of things that I need to worry about. The second thing you might do is produce insights and alerts, or insights and conclusions. So you may already be a security product, or you might have a component of your product that produces security observations. These are hugely valuable to put in context with everything else that's going on in the customer's workspace. So bringing those alerts and insights enables correlation and grouping. And this is something that we do automatically within the Sentinel environment. We will group related alerts together. We will build that investigative graph that I showed earlier automatically. And we will collect this information together and put it together in a package in a very efficient way so that an analyst, once again, does not spend time chasing data. That by the time they open an incident, there's a vast amount of information to help them make an accurate determination right in front of them, and they didn't have to do anything. This next thing is you may have reference data, and I talked about this earlier. The point of reference data is to help with determination of blast radius and scope and impacted resources and impacted applications. By building integrations that simplify this, this is usually in the way of workflow because we're usually pulling this information and pulling it in to an incident for a very specific set of information. You're helping the analyst, once again, not chase data. And you're putting as much of that picture into the incident as possible. And then the last thing is threat intelligence. So threat intelligence is used within Sentinel to create sightings. So threat intelligence is like, it's a little bit like an alert in which we're putting in context within your workspace. Somebody's observed that this IP address is potentially associated with a malicious threat actor. So if we see that IP address in any of your data, we want to do something with that. So let's talk a little bit more about what this means and what you build. So creating detections is really about the custom detection automation, that example of it's a little bit damp night right now rule that I showed you in the demo. But there's another thing that happens within Sentinel that can be useful to get in front of, and that is Sentinel has a lot of ML and UEBA-based detection capability. UEBA is user entity behavior analysis. These are behavioral baselines to basically say what's normal, and let's look for things that aren't normal. It is an area that Sentinel has a great deal of accuracy in because it has so much context about things like users. So we can know not only what's normal for you, we know what's normal for your peers and roles like you, and so we can tamp down the noise. But these are things that Sentinel can help you create detections out of, and there are some criteria associated with that. We talked about supporting investigations. These are investigation queries. One of the key things we want to consider in supporting investigations is normalization of data. Sentinel is very unusual in the industry in that we do not require you to present normalized data to Sentinel first. You can deliver whatever schema your product produces today in its native form. We will take that, we will tableize it, and we can either present a normalized view of it at query time, which allows both custom view of your data and normalized view of your data to be available in a workspace at one time. But it also allows us we can also do this at ingestion time. There's a pipeline capability that allows us to do that transformation. But what normalization really allows us to do is correlation. And so normalized data is necessary if you want to be able to use our machine learning techniques that are built into Sentinel to produce some normalized baselines. And we can talk about that when we go into the deep dives. And the last thing is enable hunting. You may have unique insights about your data that you could package up as a set of hunting queries or as full-on guided experiences in Jupyter Notebooks to present to a SecOps team as, here's how we, company X, recommend that you start looking for anomalies and weirdness in our data. So if you're bringing raw events, what do you need to build? Well, you need to connect up a place to deliver the bits. These are called data connectors. You need to build the automatic or the analytic rule, which are the detection automations that turn the observations you know to make in your data into alerts and or incidents. We would recommend that you strongly consider producing an async normalized view of this. This is a parser. Once again, you do not need to change your product. We can normalize it using a parser in our product. And so it's very simple, relatively low engineering cost to you for that. And the last thing is you might consider also workbooks. Workbooks are visualizations or dashboards, and these are things that you saw produced in Sentinel Solutions. So the idea behind this grouping in this slide, and we're going to see multiple slides like this, is to say, here are the building blocks that you want to consider adding to a Sentinel solution, which you will then package up, go through QA, and deliver to customers. Now, there's some optional things you might build here. If you want to support hunting, you can package up queries that are good starting points. It's sort of a drawer full of wrenches for hunters to start with, or you can produce fully guided hunting experiences via notebooks. So we talked about hunting a little bit as being that thing where you get a bad smell and try to figure out why you got a bad smell and how we're going to detect things that produce bad smells in the future. So Sentinel has some basic tooling for this, the hunting queries. It also has a set of visualizations. These are things that you can do in Custo, which is the query language that is native to Sentinel, that allow you to sort of poke around data and experiment with it and figure out what's going on. Now, interestingly enough, hunting is very much often a team exercise. Hunting communities within SOC teams often talk to each other and share experiments. And an easy way to do that is through creating notebooks and through these guided experiences. They're a way to put narrative text and blocks of code together in a document that can then be shared amongst hunters. And so you can use the narrative text to teach somebody how to hunt in your data at the same time that you include hunting queries and visualizations right in this guided experience. So if you want to support hunting, you're going to build hunting queries, and you are going to produce workbooks. And optionally, you may decide to create fully guided hunting experiences as a Jupyter notebook. So if you are starting from a point of view of, I already produce insights and conclusions, my product produces security detections, and we need to contribute to the overall security stack of our mutual customers, we want you to bring your insights and conclusions. And there's really two natures of those conclusions that are relevant for Sentinel. There are alerts. These are notable events. They're anomalies. They're things that might be indicative of a larger activity. Maybe a lot of alerts together turn out to be something that's indication that we have an incident. They may result in incident creation. They can trigger workflows within Sentinel. Incidents are a unit of work that will be placed in front of an analyst. And so as you're thinking about the type of alert or insight or conclusion that you bring, you need to make a determination about whether or not it's a notable event. It will help inform other activities, investigations, or whether or not it's a unit of work. This is a stop the presses. You need to go work on this right now and figure out how far this particular activity went. Incidents contain alerts, must have at least one, and often contain many. We will automatically group related alerts into incidents if the customer turns that on for a particular scenario. So if you already have insights and conclusions, you produce alerts and detections, you will need to build a data connector because we need some way to get the knowledge of that information into Sentinel. You will be building analytics rules because there's analytics rules take your detections, turn them into our nature of detection, meaning they'll put them in the right tables in Sentinel, in the alert table or the incident table. But most importantly, these analytics rules fire triggers. So we can attach playbooks and other activities to things that you contribute to detections that you've provided to a customer's workspace. And so it works in a very seamless, automated fashion. We do encourage you to build a workbook. These are visualizations associated with how many events are coming in, or how many alerts, how many detections, how many are alerts, how many are incidents. Is my data connector live? And we would typically see those in workbooks. But you might optionally build playbooks. You might know exactly what a customer should do based on the detection you make, and it may be something that can be affected through other products that are integrated in a Sentinel workspace. And that way you can use Sentinel as a means to fan out into other environments within the customer. And then lastly, we'll talk about supporting investigations. And this is really about reference data. And there's a lot of things that happen here, but the primary activity is really enrichment. This could be state data, things like CMDB data, high-value asset management databases, endpoint configuration information, information labels from data protection systems, historical log information, permissions logs, patch history. All of this is used by analysts to figure out the breadth, scope, and remediation plan for a given incident. And this is typically done in Sentinel using workflow, specifically playbooks. You can run these manually, or they could be attached to triggers, and it can be the same artifact. So a workflow that's attached to a trigger can be manually initiated by an analyst as well. But the nice thing about this is where we can grab all this other information that informs an investigation and pull it into an incident the second that the incident gets opened or that the alert gets opened, so that the analyst doesn't have to do this themselves. They don't have to spend this time chasing data. So by the time they open an incident, all of that information is available for them. So if you do have data to inform an investigation, you're going to build a slightly different type of solution, specifically one that supports enrichment playbooks. And you may optionally build a data connector. There are scenarios in which it makes sense to deliver enrichment information directly into a Sentinel workspace. But most of the time, this is done ad hoc or attached to, I have this incident or I have this question that I want to ask, and I need to go out to one of my other systems to get that information. So we've talked a lot about data. Now let's talk about activities that you can do from within the automation components of Sentinel. And these are workflows. So these are things that we might do in the heat of an incident to respond to a threat. So think of these as things in the mitigation phase of activities where I need to stop the bleeding. So things might happen, things that I might need to do might be to block an IP address or domain. If I identify that, a known threat actor has infrastructure deployed on a particular domain or address, and I see sightings or reason to believe that my systems are talking to that, a very easy way to disrupt that is to block them. And so that's something that is enforced in a network device somewhere, or in a firewall, or in a router. And so a workflow could be run from within Sentinel to go out to those devices and affect that change. I may want to disable authentication for a user that I believe is compromised, or I might want to restrict endpoint access to a network. So in the zero trust world, I might find that my laptop is no longer compliant with or in the course of an investigation, we might find out that my laptop was compromised. So we're not going to let my laptop on the network. And many more. You can imagine lots of scenarios here. The end of the day is these are all encoded as workflows. These are, playbooks, which are low code, no code things that are very easy for customers to deal with. They're also very easy for you as authors to deal with, and they can be packaged up to help a customer respond to threats, which is a very high value activity. There's some other things that are kind of useful to know, particularly about the Unified Security Operations Platform. One of the things that's built into Defender is automatic attack disruption. And so there are commands and ways to have the Unified Security Operations Platform affect automatic attack disruption on your behalf. And so there's some things that we'll talk about in future sessions about how to do that. But there are really good reasons that we've tied these things together. So if you have the ability to enforce policy, you own infrastructure, you own devices or a policy enforcement point like an agent or a router or a firewall, you can build solutions that include configuration playbooks, which allow direct integration. And oddly enough, this is one of those things where we might need to partner with the folks in the industry that work on ticketing and incident management systems, because frequently those are what's used by the teams that own these resources. SecOps teams don't typically own network infrastructure. They don't typically own servers. They don't typically own applications. The folks that do own those things tend to use ticketing systems to keep track of where they are in a change management process and keep track of requests and how well they're responding. And so it may not be something that you can affect directly. And what you may need to do is actually create a ticket in ServiceNow or create a ticket in another incident management system to let our peers in the operations space say, hey, here's a high priority thing you need to do. You need to go into your device and block this IP address for us. And the last thing we'll talk about is threat intelligence. So threat intelligence is a special case. These are indicators that have been associated with malicious activity or threats that we can use to see very quickly whether or not any of these things are active in our environment. So by pulling all of this data together into a Sentinel workspace, gives me a great rich pile of bits in which to look for any of these indicators. We have multiple ways that we can deal with this, as you might imagine. The reason that we have a lot of ways to deal with threat intelligence is because threat intelligence is very changeable. It's very custom. I joke about it frequently as saying it has the shelf life of an avocado. It's not very good for very long. Just because this IP address is associated with a malicious threat actor right now doesn't mean that it will be in 2 weeks, because threat actors are very smart. And the second they see that their infrastructure IP address has been detected, they will redeploy on a new IP address. And that IP address may get redeployed for something that's perfectly legitimate. So now it's no longer valuable for that. So there's a lot of activities that happen with qualifying threat intelligence, with scoring threat intelligence, and it's managed on a customer by customer basis. And so there's a very rich environment in threat intelligence that's evolved in the industry. We support push models, which include just indicators. We support a pull model, which is specifically for Styx taxi collections. There's a client built into Sentinel specifically for this. And then Sentinel solutions themselves can install custom threat intelligence. We have a Log4j solution, which is still one of our most popular solutions, which installs indicators of known Log4j kinds of problems. So all of these things are things that you could build and contribute. Much of this happens outside of the Sentinel solution. So you may not have to create a solution for this. You can deal directly with APIs. So we've talked, let me back up and summarize a little bit. We've talked about the activities that you can support. We've talked a lot about building blocks that are associated with each of those activities and things that you can consider building. So now what I'd like to do is talk about how Microsoft guarantees, or, well, not guarantees, but what we do to ensure quality for our mutual customers. So Sentinel solutions, as you saw, are things that can be deployed from Content Hub. They are single-click deployable. They are automation. Well, as you might imagine, whenever we want to put something in a common store that has automation around it, that we want to guarantee that it will work. And so to that point, we have a process by which we go through that. We are in column 1 today, which is figuring out what to build. At some point, though, you're going to have a set of scenarios and a set of artifacts that you're going to talk to your engineering teams about, and we'll go into build phase. And there's a set of steps associated with that, starting with how do you provision an environment? How do I get a Sentinel workspace so that I can begin exploring these artifacts and prototyping them? I'm going to figure out what my data connector will be. I'll figure out what artifacts I need to build. At some point, though, you will be in a position where you've got everything that you want, and you'll want to submit it for QA. Quality assurance for Sentinel is done through the GitHub repo. We have lots of links and documentation that will show up later on in this presentation that you'll have access to. But that QA process begins with a pull request. At some point, we'll have a lot of information go back and forth across the pull request, and eventually both the Sentinel content team and your engineering team will be happy, and we will merge your solution, which will result in a package you can now publish in the Azure Marketplace. So you will go to Azure Marketplace to partner.microsoft.com. You will create a specific offer that we will guide you on how to do. It will go live in the offer in the marketplace. It will show up in Content Hub, which means it's accessible to customers. We will have a period of public preview. It is also possible to do private preview. It's usually a question I get. And then at some point, we'll remove a public preview flag, and it'll be available in general release. So this is the basic sort of journey, sort of flight plan, as it were. So it was starting today with the getting started thing, which is just figuring out where do you want to go. And you'll march through each of these stages to customer availability. And by the time you do reach customer availability, it will be something we've both tested and are both comfortable will be work for a customer when they click the Get It Now button. So how do we get started? First, learn. There's a link in here to a white paper called the Microsoft Sentinel Integration Opportunities Guide, which covers a lot of the content that we've talked about in this presentation in much more detail. There is also the Microsoft Sentinel GitHub. The README for that repo is the technical documentation for how to create the Sentinel artifacts necessary for a solution. We would encourage you to, in fact, it's required to join the Microsoft Cloud and AI Partner Program. This is what you used to know as MPN. All of these solutions are published in Azure Marketplace, which requires MPN membership or commercial Cloud AI Partner Program membership. It also requires a commercial marketplace publishing account. And for many security companies, this may be the first time you've ever done this, so please go do this immediately, join, and then apply for the commercial marketplace publishing account. There are agreements associated with both, and sometimes it can take 3 to 4 weeks to get through the commercial agreements associated with that. There are some additional programs that might help you in the apply bar here. One is the ISV Success Program. You may qualify for ISV Success. This is Build With support. So this is a set of benefits that get you access to Microsoft products and resources for the purposes of development. It also can get you access to technical support and other architectural guidance to help you with your solutions. The other thing is the Microsoft for Startups program. If you are an early stage company and there are requirements and strict definitions of what that means, you may qualify for startups. If you do qualify for startups, your graduation from startups would be the ISV Success program. So those may become might be applicable to you, and I encourage you to click on these links and go learn whether or not they are. And then lastly, provision. Get started. There is an Azure free trial outside of anything you might get from the ISV Success program or Microsoft for Startups. There is also a Sentinel free trial. These are both 31 days. Sentinel free trial has a data cap. There is also the Microsoft Sentinel Training Lab, which puts some data and incidents and analytics rules and workbooks and sort of these artifacts together in a single-click installation so that you can begin experimenting with them. And lastly, if you do decide to go down this path, how do you get help? One is Azure Sentinel Partner at Microsoft.com. This is an alias that includes the Sentinel content team and the publishing team behind it. It is a good place for general questions, technical hurdles, and specifically publishing support. There is, as I mentioned earlier, the Microsoft GitHub repo. There's technical contribution documentation. There are solution examples and templates. We do encourage you to look at your peers' solutions. They are all open source, and so they are often great examples of good, well-supported patterns that you can use to affect your magic on the Sentinel platform. And then lastly, there's the Microsoft Sentinel Tech blog, which includes technical articles, news and information about just released features, preview features, and sometimes success stories and other things that might clue you in into activities that you might want to build. And so with that, I will pause and see if there are questions.
Thanks so much, Eric. It looks like we do have one question here. Are there any guidance on creating bulk analytical or detection rules?
So there's a couple of things that we can talk about there. In detail, I would love to know what we mean by bulk. But at the end of the day, detection rules are often things that are tuned. Customers, if we produce detection rules for our solution and we give them to a customer, the customer might find that they might be noisier than they need it to be, or that they need to filter out something, and so they'll adjust them. We can do the same things as publishers. Sentinel has a capability to consume any of the artifacts that we've talked about directly from a CI/CD repo, so either from GitHub or from an ADO, an Azure DevOps instance. This allows us to manage things like analytics rules as code. In fact, this is frequently done by our MSSP partners that might produce packages of highly customized and specialized content for their purposes that they can then deploy to multiple customers by having each workspace authenticate to their CI/CD repo. And as they make and update changes, it will automatically be deployed. So I think maybe what I'm doing is saying we have ways to manage detection rules and detection automation in bulk. Creation in bulk, I think, is a more vague question in my mind, and I'm not sure I have the perfect answer for you there.
Okay, thanks so much. And then it seems there was a bit of interest in how to set up asym parser at some point in this series, but I just wanted to vocalize that one of our SMEs on the line who's helping with Q&A said that did share a link that we have a guide on how to build and publish asym parsers with validation tools. So that is a published link for those to click on. A follow-up question to that, though, in relation, any guidance to map dependencies and requirements for asym parsers?
I'm trying to read between the lines in the question. Asym produces normalized tables and normalized columns, either at query time, which are done with joins. The asym parsers are actually implemented as custo views. So these are functions in a workspace. In terms of mapping things, I would suggest the guidance that you just talked about, the link to the asym guide. We do define all of the schema columns that we want and exactly what is the scope of what you can map to them. There's other information that you can get at a more theoretical level. Asym is fundamentally based on OSSM, which is an industry standard event format. It's an open source of industry event standard format. So you might look there for guidance as well if what you were looking for isn't available in the Microsoft documentation.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. And I think it's perfect timing. We're just up at time right now. I think all the questions have been answered. So thank you so much, Eric, for being our expert today and for sharing this information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team who helped to answer questions and provide so many resources throughout the call. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desires to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/securitycommunity. This is also where you'll be notified about upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. Also, please take a moment to submit your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. For those of you who may have additional questions on today's topic or other product-related questions, please feel free to raise them on our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/Microsoft Sentinel Community. Thank you again for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.